T-minus 1 minute to get this show on the road. So yeah, you should have 3 wines. The 3 wines are Silvaner, 2017 Silvaner from Weingut Mai, which is a producer based in the Franken. And then we have 2 really fun reds. We have the Becker Estate Pinot Noir from the Pfalz region. And then we also have the Heiter bis Wolkig, which comes from the Rheinhessen. The theme of this class is really saying, hey, Germany is not just a country that produces Riesling, which is kind of the most important grape of Germany. So it's the most public thing. It's the most recognizable face of the German wine industry. But the point is there's lots of really fun things happening on the outskirts, as it were, of the German wine industry. And my hope is to show you a few of those things and introduce you to some new flavors you may not have had before. All 3 of the wines we're doing are dry. So if that's an indication of what Germany's sort of modern wine direction is all about, that's a big indicator. And except for the Rheinhessen, which is a pretty popular German wine region, there's nothing from the Mosel or the Rheingau, which are 2 of the most important traditional sort of places for Riesling in Germany. And they also make lots of other wines, but we're going to 3 regions that are maybe considered more up and coming, more breakout regions, especially in regards to the Rheinhessen, which is really producing some of the most interesting dry wines in Germany right now.
Jackson, this is Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Would you introduce yourself and explain
Yes.
what your interest or how you came to be interested in these things?
I sure will. And I have a slide
You can take
will
it.
introduce you to a little bit more of myself. And it's 5:06, so we're going to go ahead and launch into it. Everyone who's participating is here. And okay, looks like we just got 1 joiner. Go ahead and pop your wines. Get ready. We're going to launch right into the presentation. And thank you all for being here for the Wines of Germany, Germany Beyond Riesling class. I'm super excited to be here with you. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to launch into this, and then we'll break in just a couple minutes to kind of swish and taste that first wine. But feel free to kind of get that first white in your glass, get it on your palate, have some fun with it, have it be a little palate cleanser and refresher. And Stephen, I need you to enable my screen share, if you could do that really quick. And I'm in the warehouse and it is very cold here and I can see my breath. So I'm gonna bundle up a little bit. We are in the Northern Hemisphere after all, drinking German wine that also comes from a cold climate. So Kimberly just start. That is the Silvaner. It's 1 flute bottle, the Weingut Mai, with the silver foil print writing on it. So that'll be the first one we start with here. All right, here we go. Okay, just a second here. Okay, all right, can everyone see that? Can I get some nods from people if you can see my screen in the PowerPoint? Okay, cool. So this is Germany Beyond Riesling, and we're gonna launch right into it. Okay, so about me, my name is Jackson Rohrbaugh. I'm a sommelier. I come from the Seattle area. I was born and raised here. I learned most of what I know about wine working at a restaurant called Canlis here in Seattle. It is a great classic restaurant. It's been around since 1950, has a really, really deep wine cellar. I didn't go there wanting to be a sommelier. I caught the bug a couple years in, and then I proceeded to learn every freaking thing that I possibly could about wine. And I found myself taking the Master Sommelier exam in 2017. And after a couple attempts, I passed. And it is a very difficult exam if you're not familiar with it. It's something that takes a lot of dedication. You have to be a real nerd. You have to love wine and learning everything there is to know about it. And you have to like tasting wine and like serving it and like talking about it and selling it. And those are all things that I really love to do. One of my favorite things, and really part of the reason I even started this process, is because I wanted to be an educator. I spend so much time distilling, learning all the knowledge that's out there to learn about wine and trying to figure out what more I can know about it. And then I'd love to distill that knowledge for people and provide them something new that they didn't have that day. I founded a company called Crunchy Red Fruit this year. It's brand new. We are still in our very first year of trying to figure out how to make a successful company in the middle of a pandemic, which we couldn't have foreseen and had no ability to control. But we are doing the best we can, and we're having fun with it. If you got the wines tonight, you got them from my company, Crunchy Red Fruit. It's our pleasure to provide these Zoom tastings. If, in fact, this is something we do, and we've done a lot of, especially this month during the holidays for holiday parties and things like that. So a really fun opportunity for me to taste with people. And even if they're not in the same place as me, I can get wines and get to teach people about them. If you know me, you also know I love tiki. It doesn't have anything to do with this presentation, but because I love it so much, I'm going to talk about it. Tiki is tropical drinks, oftentimes mixed with rum. And, you know, for those of you who went to tiki bars in the 70s or 80s, you know, there was a golden age back in the 50s and 60s where people were actually making the drinks right. And nowadays, if you order a Mai Tai, they dump some really terrible syrup and some really terrible bottled juice that comes off a shelf and some really low grade crummy rum. And they expect you to think that's a good drink, and it's not. But if you make the real tiki drinks right, if you make a Mai Tai with the proper fresh squeezed juice and syrup, it can be a revelatory, incredible experience. And just like I'm a nerd for wine, I'm a nerd for things like tiki and bartending. So I'm happy to talk at length about that, but I digress. So we're going to keep talking about the wines of Germany. So today's class is going to include an overview of the German wine industry. Okay, what is Germany and how does it pertain to the world of wine at large? What does it do? We're going to talk about a quick regional overview for each wine we taste and talking about and seeing a picture of some of the vineyards, whether that's the Pfalz or the Rheinhessen. We're just going to take a closer look at some of the places we're drinking the wines from. We're going to taste, super important. Okay, you didn't come here just to hear me talk. You came here to drink some delicious wine. We're going to do that. We're also going to talk about natural wine a little bit. And one of the wines in here is decidedly a natural wine. And all three of these wines are made in a very low intervention, very patient, dedicated process that doesn't use chemicals and doesn't use a lot of sort of cheating things that a larger factory winery might use to trick a consumer into thinking their wines are better. So I really care about what this process means and how to thread this needle right. So we're going to talk about that. And if you have any questions at the end about any of the specific wines, happy to address those. So let's talk about the history of German wine. Okay, a lot of places in Germany were making wine before some of the famous places in France were. There's evidence of winemaking in Germany dating back to Roman times. And so the Romans were great propagators of the vine. They took grapes with them. They took wine with them. When they'd settle areas, they would also plant vineyards. It was very common. It was the way that armies kind of kept on the march, is drinking wine, having wine to purify your water, having wine to help digest your food. It was a thing that really was one of the great fuels of the Roman Empire's expansion. And so everywhere the Romans went, the vineyards went too. And then you have sort of at the end of the Roman Empire and the medieval era, you have monks and monasteries being very important figures in propagating great viticulture practices, learning great new wine practices, starting to age their wines, starting to demarcate which parts of vineyards make better wine. This is most illustrated in Burgundy, but the same kind of thing was going on in many parts of Germany. Some of the abbeys in parts of the Rheingau have been making wine documented for at least 1,000+ years, and let alone these places we know were planting and cultivating vineyards well before the medieval era. And so there's a lot of history in Germany, and people discount that a lot. You know, everyone kind of thinks Italy and France were the main places where vineyards and the vine was cultivated, but Germany was a huge center of history for the vine. So the modern era was a little bit interesting. You know, you have some factors which we're going to talk about in a minute that made people think German wine was all cheap and crummy. But there was always people making really great German wine. It's just that they didn't always make it out of the country or get in front of people. In fact, German wine was once more expensive than the greatest and most expensive Bordeaux. It was more prized by the people who bought the best wines, whether that was kings and monarchs or popes. German wine was oftentimes regarded in the same breath as the very greatest dry red wines. It's just that taste changed. Now people think, you know, in general, that dry red is the best wine there is and the most age-worthy wine. But in reality, 100 years ago, German wine was often selling for higher prices than that and considered more valuable than that. So just something to think about when we look at, you know, how tastes change historically. There's been a huge renaissance the last 30 years. We are now seeing a huge focus on dry wines in Germany. Doesn't mean the sweet wines aren't delicious, they are. But we're seeing a lot of people wanting to compete on the world stage with great dry wines coming from their vineyards. When I think about the key features of German wine, I think about value. Oftentimes you're spending, you know, even if you're spending 20 or 30 bucks a bottle, which, you know, for some people is a lot, but the quality of the wine you're getting is on par in terms of the technology behind it and the just pure quality of the winemaking and the fact that it's made in very small quantities. That is something that is on par with a $100 bottle that you might get from Napa Valley in terms of the way that it's being invested in and way that it's being cared for from vineyard all the way to bottle. I love German wine for its food friendliness. And these three wines we're drinking tonight have such good food pairing abilities. And also because we're not talking about Riesling here, there's tons of Riesling to go around for everybody, also a very good food wine, but these three wines have such great food pairing ability. And this is gonna be Ask an Audience thing. I wanna hear from all you as we drink these together, what kinds of foods you might pair with these things. When we talk about Germany, we are talking about the northernmost limit for viticulture. So that has a lot of effect on the way that you grow your vines and the way that you make your wines. As you see, as I'm kind of hitting on the mouse right here, we're up to the 50th parallel north, and that is the limit for even getting a grape ripe anywhere in the world. And the same thing happens in the south, right? And even then, there's hardly anything grown towards the 50th parallel south. You're too close to Antarctica, it's just not warm enough. Germany has a few factors that help differentiate and help you get over the fact that you're so far north and in such a cold climate. Here's a quick shot of the vineyards. We'll see this map a few more times so you can get a better idea of the places we're drinking wine from. The one you have in your glass right now, the Silvaner, is from this teal blue region called Franken, kind of right in the middle of the country. It's hard to make wine in Germany. It's a cold and unforgiving climate. And so in order to mitigate some of the effects of cold climate like frost, oftentimes you will plant your vineyards on very steep slopes. Sometimes you're even having vineyard workers clip in with carabiners, harnesses, and ropes. You can even make iced wine in Germany where your grapes freeze on the vine, and they don't freeze on the vine everywhere in the winemaking world, but in the 50th parallel, they certainly do. There's places like this where you are literally fighting for your life if you're working this vineyard. You have to be very careful where you step. You have to be very careful how much you're loaded down with, the way that you walk up and down the hill. It's a labor of love. This vineyard costs a lot more to work than a flat vineyard just by virtue of how long it takes a worker to walk up and down it. The amount of man hours is totally different. And so anytime we see someone willfully making wine in Germany, it's already a struggle to even get that vineyard properly pruned, properly worked, properly harvested. It just takes a lot here. One thing you'll notice is a lot of vineyards in Germany are on rivers. And there's a reason for that. Rivers are moderating influences and they help kind of take out the peaks and valleys in temperature swings, especially in Germany, the valleys, right? You can get very low temps as you're getting into October and November and you're risking frost and things like that. So having your vineyard near a river can help frost be carried away by the sort of air movement of the river. Also, if you were standing here, you'd be getting some sunlight reflected to you back from the river. You can even see the angle this person who took the picture standing at. is getting sun in their eyes a little bit. And that's actually refraction, which helps grapes in cold climates ripen more easily when you don't necessarily have the warmth of the Mediterranean near you. You need every little bit of extra sunlight reflection you can get. I can get pretty geeky with all the little vineyard things in Germany, but it is really unique here, and it's different than anywhere else. Some other vertigo-inducing vineyard shots from Germany. Okay, a few things to think about with German wine. You have a lot of fashion versus tradition, right? You have the old school way of bulk wine making, like we see the Blue Nun here. And you have the fashionable dry wines that are being made now that are awesome and are really putting Germany on the map in an important way. Because of climate change, because it is getting warmer, harvests are happening earlier in Germany than they were 20 years ago. They just are. I've talked to vintners, and they are harvesting their grapes now, and sometimes in late August, early September, rather than late September, early October. That's just the reality for a lot of people trying to make wines right now. Ripening is happening quicker. There's more heat late in the harvest. You have more heat wave years than you ever did before. There's not a lot of, by volume, Germany doesn't make a lot of wine. So there's a lot of local consumption happening. When it comes to things like this Becker Pinot Noir, a lot of Pinot Noir doesn't even make it out of Germany because local consumers like drinking German Pinot Noir because it's good. And it, oftentimes there isn't enough made to leave the country and satisfy the local demand. And then, we have this Blue Nun image to fight against. This is a bulk wine. This is a wine made in massive quantities, machine harvested, bulked up with a little bit of sweet sugar syrup to make the wine sort of palatable if it's not very good in quality. And this was a really popular wine in the 70s and 80s and did a lot to kind of damage the image of the greatest German wines. It's kind of like the yellowtail of Germany, if I was going to put a marker on it, right? We have yellowtail Shiraz from Australia. It's $6 a bottle. It's cheap and cheerful, but it also cheats a lot. They do some tricks to make this wine more palatable to someone who may not be a super educated drinker. And you know what? I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with drinking it, but at the same time, there's a lot of shortcuts made to produce this wine. So when people see this, they think, oh, that's what German wine tastes like, rather than drinking one of the wines we're drinking tonight and saying, hey, there's a lot more variety in the flavors that are out there. Again, some more dry statistics for you, because I know that's what you came for tonight. What's interesting, though, is that in 1985, only 16% of all the wines made in Germany were dry, and today it's nearly 40% of all the production of German wines, and it's rising. It's been a big trend. So in 1980, there was white grapes were 80% of what was planted in Germany, and 20% was red, and now it's moved to 66% white grapes, 34% red. So a lot more red wines being made in Germany as well. When you start having climate change happen and you have more heat and more warmth in your vineyards, you can get red grapes ripened more reliably. Cool. A couple German wine terms. Everyone, I want you to pronounce these along with me. I have you muted, but this is for your own enrichment, so I don't need to hear you say it, but we're going to have some fun. So repeat after me. This first one, Sekt. All right, so that is sparkling wine. This next term is Trocken. Can you say that with me? Trocken. This is something you'll see a lot now as you shop for German wine. It's dry. Okay, so Trocken is the German word for dry, and either it means it's categorically dry and scientifically dry, as in it has less than 9 grams per liter of sugar, or it might mean that it tastes dry, even if it has a little bit of sugar on the finish. There's another term, halbtrocken. Say that again, halbtrocken. This is off dry. And this is something where I think about wines that go really well with Thai food, or wines that go really great with Vietnamese cuisine or Indian food, where there's sometimes coconut milk or lemongrass or lime juice in those actual dishes that you're eating. Really, really killer way to find good food pairing is to go to halbtrocken wines. We're going to drink one of these tonight. So Spätburgunder. Everyone say it with me. Spätburgunder. Okay, so this is the word in German for Pinot Noir. It means late Burgundy. It means it's a late harvest grape that is is in the Burgundian style. So Pinot Noir is Spätburgunder. And then you'll also see Weißburgunder. That's a really fun one to say, especially if you have the S set in here. Weißburgunder, that's Pinot Blanc. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. Let's taste some wine, huh? Get some wine in your glass. We're going to stop the screen share for a minute, and let's do this. If you have any questions now, we can do a quick little Q&A, because I just threw a lot of info at you. So I'd love to hear if you have any questions. But if you don't already have wine in your glass, get some of this Weingut Silvaner in your glass and have at it.
What's a white Pinot, Jack?
The Weißburgunder. Is that what you're talking about? That's Pinot Blanc. So it's kind of like Chardonnay. It's like a earthy white grape. It's really good. It's usually really clean white wine that's really food friendly.
So Jackson, I have to share that I'm spent my childhood in Germany.
Sorry, can you repeat? You cut out for a minute there.
Can you hear me now? Does it work? No. Okay.
Yeah, your audio's cutting out. Do you want to type your question in the sidebar? Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Jackson,
Yes.
This is Steve. Aside from whether you like the wine or not, how do you gauge the quality of a wine? What do you look for in terms of the taste? Not its origin, not how steep the slopes are, but just tasting blind. What do you look for?
Yeah, so if it's totally blind, I mean, there is a lot to be said for, okay, I know this is coming from, let's say, the Mosel River in Germany, and I know what to expect in that region, so I can taste it in my head against other examples I've had and decide if it's qualitative in that way. But when it comes to just qualitatively analyzing something on its own standalone merit with zero background information whatsoever, which is a way to taste. It's not the only way to taste. I don't think that's always a good policy for buying wine necessarily, because there's more than just a wine in the glass. There's a story of people behind it and a story of a region behind it that oftentimes can add to your enjoyment of the wine, irregardless of how fruit forward or how many points it got, if that makes sense. But to answer your question, okay, based on taste alone, I find that a wine has something going on in the nose, it's aromatic, it's telling me something when I stick my nose in the glass, and actually has some interest there, is one factor. And then also, I look for sapidity, that sort of concentration of flavor. So when I get it on my palate and it sits there, does it just disappear immediately, or does it stick around for a little bit? When I push it around my palate, does it have texture, and is it actually giving a sort of palate cleansing effect, or is it utterly devoid of that? And I'm on the hunt for wines that actually stick on your palate and have real concentration and have some silkiness and have some texture to them, if that makes sense. That's part of what I look for sure. And I do think it's really important to taste blind and to evaluate things. One, if you can pick out where in the world it came from. Two, if you can say, well, I may not know where this is from, but I really like it, and it feels like it has a story to tell. And then okay, let's see what it is and find out, what the reason for this wine being is, so to speak. All right, cool. We're going to keep going. I'm going to launch into the first wine, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what makes this one unique. Okay, so we are drinking Silvaner from the region of Franken. This one's produced by Weingut Mai. Silvaner is awesome. I think it's one of the great white grapes of Germany, because Riesling provides you all these sort of floral and tropical and citrusy notes and has a lot going on in that respect. Silvaner has a totally different flavor set, in my opinion. Silvaner is a touch smoky. It's a touch grassy. It's a touch more savory than Riesling. It doesn't have those super floral sweet notes that a Riesling might, or a Gewürztraminer might. To me, this is a white wine that's probably in some ways a little more food flexible, or has the ability to maybe not even food flexible, but it's just a little more neutral on the palate. It doesn't have super pronounced floral flavors that can sometimes get in the way of other dishes. Riesling is also a Swiss Army knife for food pairing. It's not necessarily that one's better or not. It's just that Silvaner is something we should taste more because it's cool. It's smoky. It's got that clean white wine taste, but it has a little more going on than like a Pinot Grigio.
I think this one's delicious, personally.
Yeah. Silvaner is traditionally grown in the Franken region, which is this one right here, which you saw earlier. So Franken is kind of central Germany. Here's a little bit of a zoom in. Couple of rivers flowing through Franken, really gorgeous vineyard land. And again, just like the Mosel, just like the Rheingau and the Rheinhessen, lots of steep vineyards here, planted near rivers. Again, these are insurance policies against frost, insurance policies against rot. Sometimes they help promote some of the noble rot if you're trying to make late harvest wines. Some really beautiful pictures of Franken here. Before we go into the next one, I'd love to hear some food pairing ideas for this Silvaner you're drinking. Does anyone want to chime in? I'm going to chime in first, but I would love this with like a lemongrass chicken stir fry. Sometimes wines that have a really nice neutral clean quality can be really good with really powerfully flavored dishes. So if I'm thinking about something that is stir fried, probably a little bit of soy and sesame oil, really pronounced flavors in Asian cuisine, it's best not to choose a wine that fights with them. It's best a lot of the time to pick a wine that is clean, neutral, provides a really great backdrop for all these powerful, juicy, salty flavors. So that's kind of where I gravitate towards.
Would you go with cream sauces with this wine?
Oh yeah, totally. I would love cream sauce, anything. I think you could do like a cream sauce pasta, maybe something with a little gorgonzola. Again, you can do neutral versus strong with a wine like this pretty nicely. Or just like, chicken in a cream sauce, pan sauteed, or do like a pizza bianca where you have a really great wood-fired pizza, but you don't do, instead of doing tomato sauce, you do like either Alfredo, or you do like really great pesto or olive oil on the pizza, and I think it'd be killer pairing. Okay, great. Get that second wine open. Let's go to the Becker Estate Pinot Noir. And they chose, you have an option as a producer when you're someone like Becker, really great, well-known producer in the Pfalz region. You can put Pinot Noir on your bottle, or you can put Spätburgunder on. What do you think sells better in the American market? You think people are going to walk into now, instead of putting the region name, they're putting Pinot Noir on their sort of entry-level cuvee, or the thing that they are producing from the region that hits a retail shelf at $20 or $30, because it just makes a lot more sense for a consumer who wants a really great bottle of Pinot Noir to not have to do any more decoding beyond looking at the bottle and saying, oh, Pinot Noir. And it's a little bit of a challenge for a producer who's been calling their grape Spätburgunder for 40 years. It's a challenge for them to sometimes wrap their head around, why would I put Pinot Noir on it? I'm not from France. I don't want to sell my vineyards and my tradition short, but at the same time, they have to make a marketing decision in some ways to say, hey, I want to also see this wine sell, and so I'm going to put something more decipherable for the American consumer on it. So we are drinking a wine with a little bit of age on it. I think it's absolutely stunning. This is the 2014 Becker Estate Pinot Noir from the Pfalz. So it's 100% Spätburgunder or Pinot Noir. When we talk about the Becker, one of the funny things about this wine, and then yes, this is a class for wines of Germany, but 70% of Becker Estate's vineyards are geographically, politically located in France, but they're harvested as German wine. Does anyone know why that might be? It's a weird little thing that is an anomaly for this part of the world. Perhaps you've heard of the cessation of the region of Alsace-Lorraine during the early parts of World War II. The point is the French and German have fought over the Alsace-Lorraine region for centuries, and it happens to have a French flag over it now. But in 1917, the flag being flown over the city of Colmar was a German flag. It's just the reality of a place that's right on a border that has a very dual identity. So people in the Pfalz region or the Palatinate of Germany oftentimes speak a little French or have French family surnames, or the town has a French name. And people on the French side of the border often have German family names, often have, you know, towns with Germanic sort of sounding endings to them. So it's a very cross-pollinated part of the world that has both a French and a German identity. In fact, more than either of those is an Alsace. It's an Alsace-Lorraine identity or an Alsace-Pfalz identity. And that's just the reality of it. So this is Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, you know, has grown a very short distance away. We're talking about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive to the region of Burgundy. So this is not super far away from some of the greatest Pinot Noir vineyards in the world. So it stands to reason that these wines actually are really, really killer examples of Pinot Noir from the old world as well. So as we talk about the Pfalz, is this little green region down here. You see this? So Strasbourg down south is part of Alsace. So this is a continuation as the Rhine River goes from south to north, flowing up, and goes right through the Pfalz region, right through the Alsace region. This is a very sunny part of the world. It's actually one of the driest and sunniest parts in all of Europe because you have a rain shadow with the Vosges and Hart mountains right here. And so this is sheltered from a lot of inclement weather coming off the Atlantic. So you can grow red wines there. You can make really powerful dry wines. And here's a little zoom in. The wine we're having is from the very southern part. So like I said, Becker has 70% of their vineyards in France. So we're in Schweigen, which is where Becker's winery is. And they will send their pickers across the border to pick grapes in France for the German wine they're about to make. I know, it's weird, right? It still counts as German wine though. It's not French wine. The vineyards are politically in France, but they count as German wine. Here's some shots of the gorgeous vineyard land that is the Pfalz. It's a very fairy tale place in the world. It's very pretty. You can see a little bit more rolling hills here. You have some foothills here that are part of that Vosges mountain range and that Hart mountain range that shelter all these vineyards from all the rain and all the snow that you might get in other places. So it stays relatively dry here comparatively to a place like Champagne that's on the other side of the mountains and kind of gets pounded by all the cold and wet weather coming off the Atlantic. So this wine's awesome. It's 6 years old. It, to me, tastes like a really great example of Pinot Noir. It's really aromatic. It's got that cherry fruit that I associate with great Pinot Noir grown in the old world. And I think it's just beautiful. I'd love to hear some comments on this particular wine, and also just maybe take a quick stop for some more questions. I would love to hear some food pairings for this, right? We're moving from a really clean, neutral white now to a bit of a spicier red that has a lot of quality and a lot of character.
Yeah. Well, we think it smells really good, and we're eating it with brie and find that to be quite delicious.
Ooh, yeah, I like that. Again, brie made like an hour's drive from here in Champagne. So yeah, there you go. Regional pairing.
Lamb,
yeah. I think softer lamb dishes, like roasted with some herbs. There's an herbal quality to this wine, right? It's like tastes like dry herbs and thyme to me.
Gail wants to try it later this evening with burritos.
Go for it.
He's just kidding.
Hey, I'm not going to stop you. Have at it. I also am noticing some other pairings people suggested, some salad with apple. I love that pairing for the last white we had. So, and oysters too. Yeah, you know, tequila can be a pairing for many occasions, David. I like your style. You can use this Silvaner as a tequila chaser, in fact. Just throw on some salt on your wrist and you'll be good. Okay, great.
Jackson, one
yes.
last question here, and maybe
please, go ahead.
How do you feel about sulfites? Are there sulfites in these wines?
Yeah, we're gonna get to it. It's actually, we're gonna have that discussion on our next bottle. Sound good?
Oh, okay.
All right, let's launch into it, because this is an important discussion and we got a lot to talk about. So, okay, great. Beautiful vineyards of the Pfalz. And okay, now we are on to this crazy wizard wine, this last one that we're enjoying. And this is totally different. This is a little bit of a trip. Okay, so this is a 50% Kerner and 50% Dornfelder blend, okay, from the Rheinhessen. What kind of grape is Kerner? Does anyone know? It's a white wine grape. So this is a blend of 50% white grapes and 50% red grapes, co-fermented, which means fermented at the same time, and aged in large oak barrels. What's crazy that it doesn't present like, I mean, it's definitely a lighter red, but it doesn't present like a rosé, right? It presents with some real kind of ruby dark color. Disregard the thing that says made in a white Bordeaux style. I meant, I did not mean to say that. I meant to say made with a skin contact style. But made with organic biodynamic viticulture, right? So these are people taking extra care of the land and the vineyards that they're producing from, just like the other two producers, but these guys have been putting themselves on the map for making things in a natural style, okay? So we are in the Rheinhessen here, and before we get into the regional discussion, we're gonna talk about natural wine. Okay, natural wine is like the grenade you drop into a room full of sommeliers, and then walk away. You just say the word natural wine and walk away. I'm trying to think of like a equivalent analogy for this that is non-inflammatory, but basically, it's a very controversial topic. Okay, a lot of people are very into this concept of natural wine, which means wine that is made utterly without intervention of any kind. And you can take that as a winemaker as far as you possibly want to go. You can say, I'm not going to prune my vines. I'm not going to add any kind of inputs to my vineyard, even organic ones. I'm not going to add anything. I'm just going to let the grapes do what they do, and Mother Nature will do what it will. And I'm going to pick the grapes and I'm going to put them in a vat. I'm going to see what happens. Okay, that's about the extent of the radical natural winemaking you could take things to. Or you could say, hey, I have the tools available to me to make things, patiently, to do a little bit of a dabble of organic fertilizer, or occasionally organic pesticide if I'm having issues with pests in my vineyard. Otherwise, I might lose my entire crop. And maybe at the very, very end of my fermentation, I'm going to add a little bit of sulfites or SO2, as it were, so that I can actually have a shelf-stable product and it doesn't get spoiled by the time it gets to the consumer. Or you could take it to the very, very opposite end of the spectrum and say, hey, my focus group told me that my consumers want a wine with X amount of sugary taste and they want X amount of alcohol because this tested really well in all our focus groups. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to manipulate my wine to taste how my consumer focus groups want it to taste. And then I will sell a lot and I will get whatever point score I can possibly get by manipulating the ratings and manipulating my process. And then I can sell a bunch of wine because I beat the system. And if you go down that road, you can take any shortcut you could possibly imagine to produce the wine you think people want to drink. And that includes mechanical harvesting. So running a big machine through your vineyard to pick all your grapes for you rather than harvesting them carefully by hand. That includes mechanical sorting, where you have a computer like laser scan all your grapes and flick the ones away that are not the optimal ripeness. That includes adding mega purple and other coloring agents, and you can add glycerol and other things to make your mouth feel more pronounced. You can add Velcorin, which is like a preservative to keep your thing shelf stable if it has to sit on a QFC shelf for 10 months at a time. And none of those things are illegal, which is why you'll see wines for lower than $9 a bottle, which is probably means that there's been some tampering or some chemical cheating. But you also you don't know what you're getting. There's no ingredient labeling in wine, so that Charles Shaw, that $2 chuck, has a lot of things in it that you don't know. They're not required to put it on the bottle, and so you don't know what you're getting. You're not getting just grapes. That's for sure. So just a discussion of natural wine to say that a hardline natural wine producer will do nothing, and a very, very conventional, very, very profit-seeking producer will do everything in their power to achieve the highest price, even if it means manipulating their wine. There is a sliding scale, and there's lots of really interesting places in between, and so there's a lot of discussion in the wine world about that. Now I've gone on too long, but the point is, natural wine usually means minimal sulfur use. It usually means really, really patient and careful vineyard treatment. So you're not just throwing chemicals into your vineyard until you get the result you want. You're actually paying attention in your vineyard and doing things as gentle as you can and using as many natural methods. And oftentimes when you think about it, do you want to walk through the vineyard that's being cared for in a patient way and being fertilized with natural things? Or do you want to walk through the vineyard that the vineyard workers have to wear a hazmat suit in? That's something to think about. And I think it's an important point of discussion. We're going to take a quick 1-minute break for natural wine questions, of which I'm scared to answer. But since I just went on a diatribe, I feel like I should offer the chance to for any reposts or any questions about that, because that's a lot of information to throw at you.
This is Jim Decker. Thanks for the presentation. It's really good. Really love hearing the story. And I had a funny side story. In fact, I've been chatting with a friend of mine I haven't seen in like 15 years, because her and I were in the region, the Alsace region, 20 plus years ago. And I remember planning the trip. We were debating directions to go, and someone said, "Oh, let's go to France." And I said, "Sure, I like red wine. I'll go to France." And we get there, and she told me, like, "We're not going to taste much red wine. It's all going to be white wine." And I was really bummed about that, but then I fell in love with the area and the wine too. So everything you're saying kind of resonates with me, and I remember a lot of stuff about it. So, and since then, I've grown to appreciate all that. But at the time, 20 plus years ago, I wasn't really in tune to that. But it's great seeing your presentation.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's so cool to be able to just be in a wine region and absorb the conversation happening in the wineries and see the workers out there and actually get some like firsthand experience of like, hey, this isn't just a magic thing that appears out of nowhere on the shelf and into my hand and into my glass. This is a thing that takes dozens and dozens of people, or if not hundreds, to get from the vineyard into my hands. And realizing that when you buy wine from small families, you are supporting that family's livelihood. And it's a special thing. And that's why we really care at our company about who we buy from and what kinds of practices are they doing? How are they treating their workers? How are they treating the land that they're on? Is it being done in a sustainable way that is actually going to still be here in 30 years? Or is it being done in a way that's abusive in any way? That's something to think about when we make our purchases, just like we would with the food we buy, and looking for higher quality things that might be made in an organic way, or just made in a really conscientious way. It's important to think about. Let's launch into this last wine, and then we will take a quick break at the end to ask any more questions you might have, and we'll get it done. So I shared with you a link for Natürlich Weinreich, which is this producer we're having here. And they are making this wine Heiter bis Wolkig, which is a blend of a red grape and a white grape. The Kerner is kind of like, Kerner is a little bit like Silvaner. It's a clean white grape that has some really cool aromatic profiles. Sometimes a little more aromatic, like a Riesling, but really interesting. And Dornfelder is a native German red grape, so it is something that grows naturally in Germany. It's pretty cold resistant, so you can ripen it in a colder climate. I wouldn't plant Dornfelder in southern Italy. You know, it's one that's meant for cooler climates, and that's why they're doing this here. So we are in the Rheinhessen here. Rheinhessen is this orange region right in the middle. That Blue Nun, that really cheap, goofy wine that was very popular in the 70s and 80s, that was actually a Rheinhessen wine. And so the Rheinhessen is pivoted now from a region that made the most identifiable bulk wine in Germany, the one that kind of helped gouge the reputation of German wine as cheap. And now the Rheinhessen is a center of some of the most exciting, dry, single vineyard, small producer winemaking happening in all of Germany. Here's a zoom in. It's kind of this round region. The Rhine River is up here, and all these vineyard lands fan out beneath it. And it's also stunningly gorgeous. And I hope to one day go to there because it is just gorgeous. Again, you don't see quite as many steep vineyards in the Rheinhessen. You see a little bit more rolling hills. These are places where if you wanted to mechanize and wanted to do kind of big agriculture, you could, and they used to, but now you're seeing a lot of these former factory farms turned into smaller, more conscientious, more hands-on family farms, which is really exciting. Lots of tiny villages dotting the land, a lot of cool stuff. So we're gonna kind of start wrapping things up. My hope was to show you with this that Germany is way more than Riesling. And this is just a smattering. I mean, we are like literally scratching the tiny surface here, the tip of the iceberg, as it were. I want you to know that, you know, shopping for German wine is going to reward you with new flavors, new ideas. There's a lot of people doing really cool stuff like this last wine. And when you look at each region, not only do you have people making the classic styles, those great Rieslings, both dry and off dry, and the great dessert wines of Germany, but you also have people just doing wacky, kooky stuff and having a lot of fun with it, like this last wine. And now we know that climate change is definitely making dry wines more viable and red wines more viable. And I think the sky's the limit for Germany. So yeah. A couple things I want to point you to for resources. Go to GermanWineUSA.com and poke around. There's really great maps. There's really great resources, producers. If you ever find yourself heading over there, there's some good resources to plan your trip out or to find producers to visit. And then I'm going to do my shameless self-plug for countryredfruit.com. Some of you are already long-standing great customers of mine and have been such huge supporters, which I'm super, super thankful for. But if you're not, know that we really specialize in finding off the beaten path stuff and bringing it to your door and saying, hey, like, you know, if you go in a big box retail store, they're going to tell you, they're going to show you like one shade of the color brush that the wine world is all about. And we're going to show you the rainbow. Like, we're going to show you what all is out there that you've never seen before, and focus on small family made wines that are made by small vineyards. And that's really important to us. And we try to support as many of those types of businesses as we can, because we are one. So it's important to us. And now open the floor up to Q&A. I didn't actually get any food pairings from you for this last wine. I'd love to hear some thoughts, because it is a little bit different, huh?
Jackson, a really nice presentation. I wish we could have done it in person. I bet it would have been even more interesting.
When things open back up, we can.
I have a question, Jackson. I know that in France, in Burgundy specifically, which I'm a little bit familiar with, the French inheritance laws have made it so that as generations pass down the vineyards, they get, you know, they are sort of required to split them up. So they get to the point where a family might have one row left, you know, after it's been split for several generations. How does that work you mentioned that some of the German vineyards have gone from factory farms to smaller organic producers. Is that, and what is their inheritance law thing like?
Ooh, great question. Well, that was the French one was the Napoleonic law of inheritance.
Right,
So
right,
it meant that things were split equally between all siblings,
right.
no matter how many siblings there were. So naturally, that meant, especially in a Catholic country, that there was lots of division happening.
And legitimate
Not
or
necessarily.
illegitimate.
What's that?
And legitimate or illegitimate makes no difference.
Yeah, so Germany's had some different things that have happened. You've had some state control. You've had longer. So the vineyards were not ever like formally seized from nobles and from the church in Germany like they were in France. Like in the French Revolution, they basically snatched everything from any kind of state control, from any kind of church control. And that didn't necessarily happen in Germany. It was a lot longer before you had some consolidation of some of the bigger wineries. But like the Staatsweinguter in the Rheingau is still state-run, but it used to be a monastery, and eventually some of the monasteries were taken over by the state rather than handed to a family and then split evenly for 150 years straight, like in France. So, in terms of individual inheritance laws. Germany is pretty progressive. Usually the son will, or the daughter, whoever's going to wants to take over, will start paying into, some kind of business takeover plan years in advance. And that's been happening since the post-war era. So yeah, it never quite got divided as France did, but I can't speak to like the perfect intricacies of German inheritance law right now, but it makes me want to go look more up about it.
Jackson, I can speak to at least some of it. And
yeah, bring it on.
I'm from Wines of Germany, so just jumping in here real quick. It's actually a super interesting question because, the questioner is exactly right. That law the Napoleonic sort of laws have so impacted, French wine culture. Interestingly enough, Germany did adopt that law or something similar in that era in the 1800s. But Jackson's absolutely correct. They changed it in the early 1900s. So it didn't have as radical an effect on German wine culture insofar as that you don't have, hundreds of little tiny baby estates that have a hectare or a half a hectare or less. But if you think about unlike countries to the south, Italy, Spain, even Portugal, there was a time where they were following Napoleonic code, so that the wineries essentially it works out so that the wineries in Germany or the estates in Germany are kind of in the middle, right? They're not as tiny as those in France because they only were under the Napoleonic code for about 100 years. But they're not, there's no, there are estates in Spain that are 1,000 hectare of vineyards. That's a magnitude that Germany can't even understand. Same in France. So it's kind of, I don't want to say Goldilocks, but it's definitely in the middle of those two sort of systems.
Yeah, and also like you didn't have like Germany has these big state. They were either through seizures or through, the monastery ran out of funding and wasn't able to produce, so the state just kind of took control of it, and that's happened quite a bit in Germany, and you don't see that as much in France, where the state has like taken over, because the French are like, ever since the French Revolution, very wary of any kind of like government seizure of a asset to like that had once been managed by families. So it's just like a little bit different. So yeah.
Hey Jackson.
Yeah.
Quick question. It's Lacey. Thank you, first of all, for such an awesome presentation. I missed the first part of it, juggling baby duty, but this was so fun. Well, two questions. One's kind of stupid. How big is a hectare? Hectare, is that 100 acres?
Soccer field.
What's a soccer field?
Are you exactly a soccer field?
Oh, it is a soccer field. Okay.
Pitch.
Interesting.
Pitch.
Okay. And then hearing you talk about the different family vineyards and so on, or I guess the smaller family-owned vineyards, do you have a personal relationship with any of them? Like, is there any chance that, I don't know, if you did like an interview or something, or just sort of published like, more about, the family's vineyard that you're drinking this wine from, kind of thing. Do you think any of them would be interested in that?
I do know a couple of vintners personally. Hans Rebholz is someone I've hung out with and spent some time with. Actually, that would be something, Stephen and I will talk about that, because I plan on doing more of these tastings, and it'd be really fun to do maybe an Instagram live with a winemaker and just talk and taste, and it's so illuminating to actually hear from the source rather than from me as like a third party. And like, sure, I love to talk about wine, but hearing from a vintner who just like literally walked the vineyards that morning and is telling you what the harvest is looking like for next year is really cool. And it's an experience that's absolutely worth it. So that's something we'll talk about with Wines of Germany and see if we can maybe get something like that on the calendar.
Yeah, just curious. It would just be so fun, and even like seeing your photos and stuff is like, man, it makes me want to travel again. And anyway, but thank you for such a cool lead tasting. This was awesome.
What are you going to eat with this, everybody?
We're eating butter chicken tonight, so hopefully it works out for us.
Oh, butter chicken! I like that idea. Sounds awesome.
Spicy, very spicy.
Prime rib sandwich, I think, would be really good. Since probably most of you have some prime rib still in your fridge, I'm guessing. Cool. If there's any more questions, we'll hang out for like a minute longer.
What about the sulfurs? You were going to talk about the sulfurs in wine.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. So
anything else you want to say? Why does it give us horrible headaches?
Well, so there's a lot of myths out there about sulfites or sulfur dioxide, SO2. It's naturally occurring in every wine. You can't make wine without naturally occurring sulfur. So it happens in every wine. There's a fact, one dried apricot has more sulfites than pretty much any bottle of wine. I don't know that it's sulfites that give the headaches. Okay, so we talked about natural winemaking, and there's lots of other things that end up in wines. And I don't know if it's the interaction in our systems of sulfites and also lots of other additives, whether that's the Velcorin or the Mega Purple or the grape powder adjuncts or the powdered tannins that you find in a lot of conventionally made wines. I sometimes pick up like let's say a pretty conventional, cheaply made bottle of Washington Cabernet or Napa Cabernet, something like that. Maybe not Napa, maybe just a California Cabernet, something that ends up on the shelf for $15 and is made in a big, super fruity style to appeal to most consumers. I drink a glass of that, and sometimes I get like really like a weird feeling. I find it in the same way that if you eat highly processed foods, you sometimes feel gross afterwards. Like there's a wine version of going through a fast food drive-through and gorging yourself. And that is cheaply made processed wines made in large quantities with lots of shortcuts. And I can't say that sulfites is the culprit, but I think highly processed stuff with lots of additives that aren't required by law to be listed on the label, mind you, I think that's the culprit more than just the sulfites. Because I know I can eat a bag of dried apricots and not get a headache necessarily, and that's a couple bottles of wine's worth of sulfites. But I do know that sulfites should not just be added en masse to a wine with no regards to reducing the amount in total. So there's a lot of people out there who might even add a little bit of sulfur to their wine. Like I know that all three of these vineyards had a little bit of sulfur added, but it's finding a way to judiciously add it in the winery and after the fermentation ends that is the real challenge for vintners. And again, you ask like 10 different wine professionals, you're going to get 10 different answers. But my theory is that the more highly processed something is, the more it's likely to make you feel funny after you consume it. I hope that helps elucidate a little bit.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
The last bottle we're drinking says it's vegan. I know that there's egg whites in some wines, but what else makes a wine not vegan?
You don't see it used nearly as much anymore, but there used to be the use of a fish bladder protein called isinglass that was a stabilizing and fining agent that worked very similarly to egg whites, where you have suspended tiny powdery solids in a finished wine that you want to get out so that it's shelf stable and that nothing is like, you don't have floaties in your bottle. And so they would add a little bit of this isinglass into a bottle or into a big vat of wine, and then all the stuff would kind of like glom onto it, and then you could sift it out. So in an effort to not use animal byproducts in wine production, where you're seeing a lot less people use things like isinglass or egg whites, oftentimes you'll see bentonite clay used as a fining agent. And sometimes a lot of wines just aren't fined or filtered at all, and they can still produce a really great shelf stable wine without fining or filtering. So. Great. Have I answered everyone's questions? I'm going to put my personal email right here. And if anyone has any need for anything else from me or Crunchy Red Fruit or even Wines of Germany, feel free to reach out to my personal email, and I'd love to answer your questions. And you are all on my email list. And so there'll be more fun events coming up. I think we might do something else with Wines of Germany coming in the new year that will pick a different topic and go a different direction. But would love if anyone else wants to be involved. So thank you all for being part of this. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you really enjoyed these wines.
Thank you, Jackson. Happy
This
New
was
Year,
awesome,
everyone.
Jackson.
Thanks, Jackson.
Bye.
Cheers,
They're
everybody.
good.
Thanks, Jackson.
Dankeschön.
Dankeschön.